Hello and welcome to our SPOC, or Scrum Product Owner Certified course. Let's learn how to embed change in the Scrum development. As we know, every project, regardless of the methods or the framework used, is exposed to change. In a fast-changing environment, the customers are bound to come up with several changes to the scope throughout the life of the project. It is imperative that the Scrum team understands the challenges faced during the projects and understand how the Scrum development processes are designed to embrace change. This chapter is divided into the following sections. The first being Roles Guide and the relevance of the primary Scrum roles in change process. The second being Overview section, which defines the concept of change and also addresses how change requests are handled in the Scrum process. The third being Change in Scrum, which explains the importance of effectively managing change in a Scrum project. It also addresses how flexibility and stability can be achieved through appropriate handling of the change requests that arise throughout a project. The next section being Integrating Change, explaining how change requests are assessed and approved or rejected when applying the Scrum framework. This section describes the impact of changes to programs and portfolios and explains how any change may have a cascading effect on all dependent projects and sprints.
In today's fast-changing environment, there is continuous pressure on changes in technology, market conditions, and business patterns. Change is inevitable in all projects. In today's hyper-competitive world where technology, market conditions, and business patterns are continuously shifting, change is the only constant. A primary principle of Scrum is its acknowledgement that A. Business stakeholders, such as customers, users, and sponsors, do change their minds about what they want and need throughout a project, sometimes referred to as requirements churn, and B. That it is very difficult, if not impossible, for business stakeholders to define all requirements during project initiation. Scrum development projects welcome change by using small development cycles that incorporate customer feedback on the project's deliverables after each sprint. This enables the customer to regularly interact with the Scrum team members, view product increments as they are ready, and change requirements early on in the development cycle. Also, the portfolio or program management teams can respond to change requests pertaining to Scrum projects applicable at their level. Scrum embodies a key principle from the Agile Manifesto, Fowler and Highsmith in 2001, responding to change over following a plan. Scrum is practiced on the basis of embracing change and turning it into a competitive advantage. Therefore, it is more important to be flexible than to follow a strict, predefined plan. This means it is essential to approach project management in an adaptive manner that enables change throughout rapid product development or service development cycles. Being adaptive to change is a key advantage of the Scrum framework. Although Scrum works well for all projects in all industries, it can be very effective when the product or other project requirements are not fully understood or cannot be well defined up front, when the product's market is volatile, and or when the focus is on making the team flexible enough to incorporate changing requirements. Scrum is especially useful for complex projects with a lot of uncertainty. Long-term planning and forecasting is typically ineffective for such projects, as they involve high quantities of risk. Scrum guides the team through transparency, inspection, and adaptation to the most valuable business outcomes. Unapproved and approved change requests. Requests for changes are usually submitted as change requests. Change requests remain unapproved until they get formally approved. The Scrum guidance body usually defines a process for approving and managing changes throughout the organization. In the absence of a formal process, it is recommended that small changes that do not have a significant impact on the project be directly approved by the product owner. The tolerance for such small changes could be defined at an organizational level or by the sponsor for a particular project. In most projects, 90% of change requests could be classified as small changes that should be approved by the product owner. So, the product owner plays a very important role in managing changes in a Scrum project. Changes that are beyond the approval level of a product owner may need approval from relevant business stakeholders working with the product owner. At times, if a requested change could have a substantial impact on the project or organization, approval from senior management, such as the executive sponsor, chief product owner, program product owner, and/or portfolio product owner, may be required. Change requests for the project are discussed and approved during the Develop Epics, Create Prioritized Product Backlog, and Refine Prioritized Product Backlog processes. Approved change requests are then prioritized along with other product requirements and their respective user stories, and then incorporated into the prioritized product backlog. Figure 1-6 summarizes the change approval process, and Figure 6-2 explains how prioritized product backlog is updated with approved changes.
We're going to learn the importance of effectively managing change in a Scrum project, and how we achieve flexibility and stability in changing environment using Scrum Framework. The Scrum Framework emphasizes flexibility. However, it is important to understand that although the Scrum Framework emphasizes flexibility, it is also important to maintain stability throughout the change process. In the same way that extreme rigidity is ineffective, extreme flexibility is also unproductive. The key is to find the right balance between flexibility and stability, because stability is needed in order to get work done. Therefore, Scrum uses iterative delivery and its other characteristics and principles to achieve this balance. Scrum maintains flexibility in that the change requests can be created and approved at any time during the project. However, they get prioritized when the prioritized product backlog is created or updated. At the same time, Scrum ensures that stability is maintained by keeping the sprint backlog fixed and by not allowing interference with the Scrum team during a sprint. In Scrum, all requirements related to an ongoing sprint are frozen during the sprint, and no change is introduced until the sprint ends, unless a change is deemed to be significant enough to stop the sprint. In the case of an urgent change, the sprint is terminated and the sprint meets to plan a new sprint. This is how Scrum accepts changes without creating the problem of changing release dates. Achieving flexibility in change. Scrum facilitates flexibility through transparency, inspection, and adaptation to ultimately achieve the most valuable business outcomes. Scrum provides an adaptive mechanism for project delivery in which a change in requirements can be accommodated without significantly impacting overall project progress. As shown in the figure, flexibility in Scrum is achieved through 5 key characteristics: iterative product development, time boxing, cross-functional teams, customer value-based prioritization, and continuous integration. Scrum follows an iterative and incremental approach to product and service development, making it possible to incorporate change at any step in the development process. As the product is developed, a change request for the project can come from multiple sources.
Business stakeholders.
Particularly, sponsor, customers, and users may submit change requests at any time throughout the project. Moreover, stakeholders may submit change requests as they are reviewing the deliverables during the demonstrate and validate sprint, retrospect sprint, or
Retrospect release
processes. Ongoing interaction between the Scrum core team members may motivate Scrum core team members to suggest changes or improvements to the product, service, or some other part of the project. Usually such changes, like any others, are captured in change requests, and the product owner makes a final decision about such changes should be considered as formal change requests. Because of changes in the strategic direction of the company, competitive landscape, funding-related issues, and so forth, the portfolio and program management can recommend changes that affect the project. Due to change in government regulations, lessons learned from previous projects, or some corporate directives for quality and security, The Scrum guidance body may submit change requests that affect all projects. These are the sources of change requests in a project. Time boxing refers to setting short periods of time for work to be done. If the work undertaken remains incomplete at the end of the time box, it is moved into a subsequent time box. Time boxes aid in gauging the process of the project and allows the team to easily identify when they may need to modify a process or approach. Time box sprints contribute greatly toward meeting deadlines and achieving high levels of productivity. They provide a platform to gauge results and obtain feedback in a short span of time. Errors or problems can be identified early and can be rectified quickly, hence achieving flexibility through time boxing. Having cross-functional and self-organized teams allows the group to adapt and effectively manage the ongoing work and any minor issues or changes without having to obtain support or expertise from members outside the team, and in the process, create deliverables that are ready to be shipped if necessary. The prioritization of requirements and work in a Scrum project is always determined based on the value provided to the customer. When a request is made for a new requirement or a change to an existing one, it is evaluated during the
Refine prioritized product backlog process.
Using continuous integration techniques, Scrum team members can incorporate new and modified features into the deliverables whenever possible. These are the 5 key characteristics which help achieve flexibility. We're going to learn how change requests are assessed and approved or rejected when applying the Scrum framework. Whether the project requirements are generally stable, and there are typically only minor changes, or whether the project requirements change throughout the project, change management is executed in the ongoing processes of prioritizing and adding tasks to the prioritized product backlog. By locking down the scope of every sprint, the team is able to efficiently optimize and manage their work and effort. Biggest advantage of Scrum framework is that the team does not have to worry about managing changes once they start working on a sprint. If project requirements are generally stable and major changes are not expected in the near future, the length of a sprint may be set to be longer, 4 to 6 weeks. If project requirements are not very well defined, or if significant changes are expected in the immediate future, the length of sprint may be relatively shorter, 1 to 3 weeks. This provides stability to the Scrum team members to work on shorter sprints and deliver results. It is important to note that expected change is not the only factor used to determine the length of sprint. Other factors that are also needed to be considered include actual time to get work done, planned date for a release, any other factor as determined by the product owner or Scrum Master that need to be considered while determining the length of sprint. Length of sprint should preferably be consistent. One of the greatest impacts of changing the length of sprint is that it causes a reset on all tracking at the project level. Previous velocities may become useless for forecasting and planning of future sprints. Without an accurate velocity, which is a primary metric in any Scrum project, the Scrum team cannot be measured for effectiveness. Refining helps ensure that requirements and their user stories is done well in advance of the sprint planning meeting, so that the team has a well-analyzed and clearly defined set of stories that can be easily broken down into tasks and subsequently estimated. The product owner is responsible for adding and revising prioritized product backlog items in response to any changes, and is responsible for providing more detailed user stories that will be used for the next sprint. It is important to note that any item in the prioritized product backlog is always open for re-estimation until the sprint backlog is finalized in the
Update sprint backlog process.
After that, changes can continue to be made until the sprint planning meeting if required. An effective refining of session should result in clearly defined prioritized product backlog items, PBIs, so that the Scrum team clearly understands what the customer's requirements are. Acceptance and done criteria may also be discussed, although the product owner has the final say on prioritized product backlog items and whether to accept or reject any user stories. It is the Scrum Master's responsibility to ensure that the requirements and acceptance criteria are not altered during the sprint review meeting for the user stories completed in the current sprint. We are going to learn the impact of changes at the program and portfolio levels using Scrum Framework. Any change that arises in either the programs or portfolios may have a cascading effect on all dependent projects and sprints. Therefore, it is advisable to minimize changes at these higher levels. If a change is required and all stakeholders are in agreement to make the change at these levels, the following should be kept in mind. In portfolio, it is not recommended to make changes in between two portfolio backlog meetings. If the change is minor, the portfolio product owner should secure approval from the relevant stakeholders and then add the requirements to the portfolio backlog. Product owners of the program and project will consider those requirements for inclusion in future sprints. If the change is major, the portfolio efforts, along with the associated programs, projects, and sprints need to stop, and a portfolio backlog meeting should be conducted to determine next steps. In program, it is not recommended to make changes in between two program backlog meetings. If the change is minor, the program product owner should secure approval from the relevant stakeholders and the portfolio product owner, and then add the requirements to the program backlog. Product owners for the project will consider those requirements for inclusion in future sprints. If the change is major, the program effort along with associated projects and sprints need to stop, and a program prioritized product backlog meeting should be conducted to determine next steps. Program prioritized product backlog meetings should preferably be conducted at 2 to 6 month intervals. This brings us to the end of our session on the change. I look forward to seeing you in our session on other chapters of the SBOK. Until then, goodbye and thank you for learning with us.